Hi guys, Alex Daley here, writer and contributor for YPN. I'm joined here by Martin Rapley, who, if you've been watching, if you've been reading, you've probably seen his stuff come up from time to time. Most of you will probably know who he is already, but for those who have previously skipped all of his stuff, and shame on you for that, we'll get a quick little introduction from him now, and then we'll get right into it. So yeah, Martin, tell us about you for a bit.
Yeah, yeah, thanks very much. My background is construction. I worked for building contractors straight from school, always on the management side of things, initially as a quantity surveyor, later on as a project manager. I stumbled across property investing when I had my own construction business. I was looking for clients. I went to some property networking meetings, absolutely found clients, but very soon realized that it was more lucrative effectively to be my own client and to get into property investing for myself. So since 2013, I've been a property investor, but I've also carried on advising, training and working with property investors to help them understand the process of delivering projects, managing projects, and to some extent not being scared by working with builders, doing refurbishments and adding value to things, because I've loved it for the last nearly 40 years and I want other people to love it as well.
For sure. So your strategy when investing yourself is that to kind of follow that BRR method, or various different strategies there, flips? What do you do?
So yeah, our first criteria is, can we add value to a property? That's where we're starting from. Aware also of some creative strategies, lease options and things like that. We've used all of those. Generally at the moment we're refurbishing to hold, but in the past we've refurbished to flip as well. But generally, or everything we start with is we're going to hold it for the longer term, which does mean that we're not necessarily looking at adding enormous value, but it doesn't mean that we have to get all of our money back out, which was what you would want to be doing if you're going to flip. You obviously want to make a margin on every single deal. And for that takes a bit of risk away from us, but we're really looking at building a pension pot, mostly flats and HMOs.
So you mentioned that your key kind of first fundamental is that you can add value. Why do that versus just buying a turnkey property that you can just get into the door, maybe even already rented out? What's the thinking?
Well, really, this is about recycling funds a bit quicker, adding money into our wealth pot effectively, and I've got skills and knowledge to add value, so why wouldn't I do it? And I'm still passionate about working with builders. I still love going to a building site. I do some of that for some clients, but I can do it for myself. Why not do what I enjoy doing, working with builders and using my skills and knowledge to add value? So yeah, that is, and it's how my brain's wired. That's what I want to do.
And it's something that a lot of investors and a lot of gurus talk about, the need to add value in order to recycle, and that's very much what we're talking about today. As you know. So let's start right at the beginning. Let's not talk about contracts with builders. Let's not talk about breaking ground at the start. Let's talk about initially identifying properties that you can add value to, because the reality is that it's not going to work for every property. You can't just buy any property off Rightmove. Just finger down that one, I'm having that, and you'll be able to add a serious chunk of value. Tell me about identification from that. What how you kind of advise your clients, but also how you would advise yourself when you're doing this yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think this is so important, because this is where I think a lot of property investors are already, some of them unfortunately have bought the wrong property because they haven't dug deep enough. And the first thing to say here really is, an estate agent's job is to sell a property on behalf of their client. Their client is not you. So they will, to some extent, tell you whatever they think you need to hear to buy that property. And for a lot of estate agents, any property that's run down is an ideal property for a property investor. That ticks the box. Oh, we'll let the property investors know about that rundown property. And we as property investors have got to step back and say, well, okay, it might be run down, but is is it the right property in the right area? Is it the right property for my strategy? My strategy is HMOs. Could this property be converted into an HMO? Does it work as an HMO? Is it in the right part of town? Do the sizes meet the criteria for an HMO? Is it the right demographic? For my HMOs, if you specialize in student HMOs, is that property in the right part of town to be a student HMO? Don't let the estate agent say, well, it's pretty close to the university. You need to do your own research and be sure that it's right, and be sure that when the estate agent says, well, you could refurbish it for £20,000, that £20,000 is the right cost for it. And when the estate agent says, and it's going to be worth £300,000 finished, but is that £300,000 on a par with the £20,000 refurbishment, or is the one that sold 5 Dales down the road for 300 grand being refurbished to £50,000 worth of cost? And estate agents aren't going to tell you any of this. They're just going to drop little bombs on you that you've got to interpret and unravel to see if this, what you're being told is absolutely right and is right, is right for the property, and that ultimately that the property is right for you and is going to be something that you can add the value to and flip, or indeed add the value to hold. But if you're going to add the value to flip, you've really got to probably be looking at more than the obvious thing that the estate agent's seen. Sure. So when the estate agent is run down, you've got to find more than that.
Sure. I think there's an interesting, as you're talking about, I was thinking of an example. I can remember talking to a friend about property. They weren't involved in the property, but it's a trap that I feel a lot of people can get involved in when they were looking for that for their first property at the time. They saw a rundown property, and the immediate kind of thing they were saying was, look at the potential, you can make some good money off that. What they hadn't looked at is necessarily the price compared to the rest of the area, and actually there's often a trap you can fall down into is rundown equals profit capability. Actually, sometimes these rundown properties, the price doesn't reflect their rundown state. It might reflect that there's a little bit rundown, but it doesn't reflect that it's significantly rundown. And actually, just because it is rundown doesn't necessarily mean that there's huge bags of potential on there, because we start talking about things such as ceiling price. And I wonder if you can kind of go in and talk about ceiling price a little bit and explain to everyone what that means.
Yeah, so the term ceiling price is basically saying, what is a comparable house selling for in this area. So you've got a 3-bedroom semi. It might be on the market for £200,000. The one up the street sold last week for £220,000. The one over the road sold at 221. That is the ceiling price. It's 220, and this one is, we might say, the one that's on the market is below market value. It's a BMV deal, but if it needs refurbishing and that refurbishment might cost more than £20,000, then actually that property has now got to be sold at greater than the ceiling value to get the money back out. Now, is that possible? Well, perhaps it is. Perhaps we can do something to this property that makes it better than the ones that have sold just up the road. Maybe we're lucky and there's a bit of a rising market. But of course, the other thing to consider here is that perhaps this house that is being sold at £20,000 below market value, whilst it might cost us £20,000 or £25,000 to refurbish it, maybe there's a young family, a young couple can buy this property. They can camp in the living room. They can have their family and friends round at the weekend with painting parties. And ultimately, because their dad's a plumber as well, they can actually refurbish this property for little over £5,000. And because they're not outsourcing it to builders. They're doing it themselves. They don't need to do the whole lot in a 6-week period to get it back on the market. They don't need to worry that they can't use the spare bedroom for a year until they get round to it and they've got the money. So, it's right for them, but not necessarily right for us.
For sure, for sure. And I appreciate this when talking about ceiling price and things like that, it goes into a valuer's territory. You're not a valuer, so I'll caveat with that, but I'm interested in to hear your opinions on that. People talk about, you see videos talk, oh, we broke the ceiling price. Would you ever, when looking at your when doing your due diligence and looking at potential deals, would you ever say, I think I could break the ceiling price here? I think the ceiling price is soft here, and actually I might expect 5,000 extra. Do you work that in, or do you tend to say ceiling price is ceiling price? If I get more than it, great, but I'll do my maths on that.
So me personally, I'm aiming to do better properties than on the market than my competitors, but I'm pretty realistic about the ceiling prices.
Yep.
Now, let me tell you a story of a developer I worked with a few years ago. He had a view that he could break the ceiling prices in his area when he was doing developments. And not only was it a view, it was proven. He could break the ceiling prices. He was doing very good quality developments, and he was breaking ceiling prices. Now, whenever he went for finance for the to buy the properties and develop the properties, the lenders would never value the end property beyond the ceiling price. They were saying, well, you're creating a 3-bedroom semi-detached house that sells for £250,000. That's what we're seeing. Happy days. We're all delighted if you sell it for 260, but we will not lend you any more money. So he had to base his valuations, he had to base his finance expectations on the ceiling price. And then that extra 10 grand, whatever it was at the end, was the cream at the end. And until he'd built up a really good reputation and demonstrated it time and time again to the lenders, only then would they say, well, you might get 10 grand more. So we have actually factored 3 grand more in. So I think it's possible. Well, I know it's possible to smash the ceiling prices, but don't rely on that when you go for finance, because your investors and your lenders will say, as far as we're concerned, it's a 3-bedroom house. Happy days, we'll be delighted for you if you do smash the ceiling price, but we're not going to factor that into our lending criteria.
Sure. Sorry, you cut out a bit then just for the last 5 seconds. I wonder if you could just repeat that, because I think it won't come up on the recording.
Yeah, so just saying that whilst it might be possible to break the ceiling value, and lenders and investors will be delighted if you do, they're not going to base their lending upon hope value that you might do it. Yeah. And they're going to say, the one over the road, that sold for 250, therefore, we're going to say yours is worth 250. Happy days, we're delighted for you if you sell it for 260.
Absolutely. Thank you. And the reason why I've kind of gone on initially about this ceiling price, even though it's not the construction stuff, which we're mainly here to talk about, is because it comes into everything. It's obviously we set a budget then off the back of the ceiling price. We can't afford, you buy a house for 200,000, the ceiling price 300,000, and you want to make 30 grand profit on it. We know we can't overspend there, otherwise we're eating into it. There's no point. I'm in a position with my personal home actually, which is exactly that situation. I bought it, and it was a doer-upper. It was your classic old person's house, but it was one of only, I think, 3 houses on the street with an extension out the back. And so haven't needed to do an extension. I've added in an ensuite, and I've made it look very nice, but I'm also, I don't have a drive. And when talking to estate agents to sense check my own kind of, okay, I'm looking at comparables. I'm trying to work out roughly where a ceiling price is for something that doesn't have many comparables. None of the houses have sold with an extension, and no one else has an ensuite in it. I've come to the conclusion that I don't want to put in a drive, even though I'd quite like a drive, because I don't think I'd even get back what I'd spend on it. And so the reason why I talk about ceiling prices is, as you know, but for the benefits of the watchers and readers, is that it all comes down to budget, which is something that we'll kind of go on to talk about, and making sure we watch our money as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a couple of things in there. First of all, if it's your own house and you need a drive, put the drive on. Sure. But as a property investor, wearing a property investor's hat and with a property investor's mindset, does the drive add value?
Sure.
Perhaps not. Might it sell quicker? Perhaps it will. So we've got, and this is where we're adding our value to this. We're taking our skills and expertise and knowledge to understand, well, is it right to do a drive? Yes or no? What should we be doing? And then touching on that bit about not overspending, really just to reiterate that the price that the property is on the market for should not be your starting price. The price that you should start from is, what is this property worth when I've refurbished it? Oh, it's going to be worth 300,000. I want to make £30,000 profit for my time and effort and everything else. The cost of delivering this is £30,000. I've got some costs for finance and some solicitors and other bits and pieces. So because I've started with 300, I've now deducted off these other bits. I must not spend more than £230,000 buying this property. And if it's on the market for £250,000, don't start haggling at 250, start at 230 and say, that's my best offer for what I want to do with the property. Someone else might come up with more. Someone else might say, yeah, I can camp in the living room and get a painting party at the weekend and I'll pay the full asking price for that because it's what I want. But for what we want, we've got to be firm on that. Otherwise, you can't shave the build cost after you've bought it at the wrong price. You've got to build the right build cost. In reality, the only price that is ever adjustable is the purchase price. Everything else is fixed.
I often say you make your money when you buy.
Yes.
That's absolutely right, and I completely agree with you. The kind of drive situation. For me personally, I'm stuck in that investor mindset, even though it is my home. But that's because it's not my forever home, and is being used as a stepping stone like that. So looking at how we add value, and let's kind of cover these options. Where would you start? So you have a hypothetical property. I appreciate it's going to vary property to property, but we can kind of talk in general terms here. Where would you start? What's the first thing you kind of look at and say, okay, can I do this? And can I do that? And can I do this? Where do you start?
So I suppose to some extent we can look at this as from easy to hard, from cheap to expensive in many ways. And to some extent, it's where is an investor on their journey. If they're relatively new, then you want to be going at the easier end, although you're not going to make so much margin on it. If you're reasonably established, then take on something a little bit more ambitious. So at the entry level, I would always say it's look at how can we reconfigure what we've got there at the moment. Now, two obvious things that we talk about all the time as property investors. Number one is we take a one-bedroom flat, we move the kitchen out of its own room into the living room, and we turn that into a two-bedroom flat. Well, it already needed a new kitchen, and all we're doing is putting the kitchen on the other side of the wall. So the cost is pretty negligibly, it's hardly anything extra, and yet we've bought a one-bedroom flat, we've got a two-bedroom flat. So that's easy. The other thing that we do a huge amount of is we take a family house, we reconfigure it, and we deliver it as an HMO, or we use it as an HMO. Maybe we haven't done anything apart from put a bed in the living room and put in one extra bathroom and a shower or something like that. So relatively entry level things that, an extra ensuite might cost £3,000, maybe a little bit cheaper in a few cheaper parts of the country, a little bit more up towards £4,000 in some areas, bit more £6,000 if you've got some complicated drainage. But it doesn't take a lot of work to get an extra ensuite in and add some value. And so is there a family house out there where perhaps you can put in an ensuite, maybe put a downstairs cloakroom in? Family living now, we've got a lot of houses where we've got quite small kitchens and a dining room. Maybe we take down the wall between the two, and now we've got an open plan family room across the whole of the back of the property. Taking down that wall, putting some steel in might only be £5,000. You're going to do some decorating, but you're probably already looking at a house that needs decorating anyway. So the extra spend is not a great deal, but we've got something that's more functional, suits the modern way of living. Bathrooms are always a tick box, en suites are a tick box, cloakrooms are a tick box. And we've added value without spending a huge amount of money and taking a lot of risk.
Sure. So you talk in there about your en suites and your cloakrooms, you know, your WCs down the stairs. They're very interesting to me. A, because I've done it in this property, but also because I've been looking to do it in other properties. Do you find a significant amount? I appreciate you can't give an arbitrary figure of, yeah, you'll spend 4,000, you'll make back 10,000. But do you find that they're pretty high ROI? They're pretty high ROI kind of investments.
Well, so this comes back to the very first question about where are we buying and why are we buying it? You know, if you're going to add an ensuite to a starter home, that's probably not going to add any value, because the people that are looking for a starter home are just happy to have 4 walls and a roof that's their own property. And there might only be 1 or 2 of them anyway, and they're happy to share a bathroom. Whereas if you can find a bigger family home that doesn't have an ensuite, you're now opening that property up to a slightly different market, a slightly more aspirational market, where perhaps an ensuite is a dream. It's someone that's come out of the starter home, and we want a house with an ensuite because we've got a young family and they're always in the bathroom and there's always muddy football gear and all of that. So we really want the ensuite. So if you can put that ensuite into, say, the 1970s style house that generally wasn't built with an ensuite, you're now perhaps delivering an ensuite bedroom option in a family house in a nice estate near the schools, near the shops and all of that. And you're now attracting aspiring people. Now, those same people will perhaps want the family day room as well. So it's hard to say, will the ensuite for £3,000 add through more than £3,000 worth of value? But the ensuite and opening up the family room and putting in a nice new kitchen that's well planned out, because perhaps that family want a dining table space, or maybe they want a bar counter, do your research. So it's each little thing on its own is hard to say what does it do, but bring 2 or 3 of them together,
you change the level of the property.
We've lifted it to the next level.
Absolutely. So I was driving through a couple of days ago. It was only this weekend. I was driving through and saw a house that I'd regularly seen growing up, and I looked across and I could see there was an old garage that had now been turned into it had been converted. Most likely, my assumption from the looks of it was an office. I think maybe COVID has changed that, and people are starting to do that. Are you starting to see more kind of conversions of garages? And what does that look like? How much does that cost? I've no idea how much that costs.
Yeah, and of course, we're talking here predominantly about garages that are integral into the structure. They might be built on the side. We're certainly not talking about something that's in the back garden or a prefabricated garage or anything like that. And of course, what's happened over the years is that most people now don't use their garage to put their car in it. A lot of the garages aren't even big enough for a lot of the cars we drive now. So garages are becoming a space that is more valuable for residential use than it is as for storing our car. And particularly, I guess over the last 15, 20 years, but a lot since COVID, a lot of people don't want to move to get extra space. If that extra space is already bolted on the side of their house.
And why would they? It's expensive.
That's right. And it's got some bikes in it. So, absolutely. Stamp duty and legal costs and all the other bits. So converting a garage is, I would say, in many ways, that next level up. It's a little bit more ambitious than reconfiguring, but it's not beyond a lot of people. And converting a garage can start at £12,000-15,000 for a basic conversion. And this is take out the big door at the front, brick up some of the front, put a window in there, insulate the walls, insulate the roof, insulate the floor, maybe create a doorway through, but there might already be a doorway, put some electrics in, dry line it all, paint it all out. There's always a gas meter that's in the way, so you end up boxing that in, and there's some bits and pieces to do. But that could easily start at £12,000, depending on what you've got. Maybe that runs up towards £18,000-20,000. If you could convert a double garage, that might run up towards £30,000. And you've got a good space. A thing I'm seeing a lot of people do is they leave the garage door at the front and a stubby storeroom, and then they build a wall behind that and put a window on the side. And so now they've still got somewhere to store the bikes, maybe put the dustbins and a few bits and pieces, but we've still got a good sized room behind that. On the ground floor, maybe you could use that as a bedroom. You could dress that up as a teenager's bedroom. Maybe you get an ensuite in there if it's full garage size. But certainly, as you say, an office, a playroom, maybe a dining room, another living room, or something like that. So, and we are valuing properties. Finished properties are valued based on square footage, square meterage. So we've added on another 2.5 meters wide by 5 meters deep, 12 square meters or so of real estate space. There's value to that. And in a lot of parts of the country, that's going to add on £20,000 plus. So now we're starting to get the margin. Now, if you've done that and you've put the ensuite upstairs and you've opened up the kitchen family room, it's where we start to multiply these things up. Now we're saying, we have actually created some real value here.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one. I think it's something that in recent years, in particular, has started to get quite it started to get quite fashionable. Maybe fashionable is the wrong word. It started to become more commonly seen. Again, it could throw some interesting to think about. It could throw some interesting situations there when looking at comparables, because it's very possible there are going to be no comparables anywhere near that have done what you're doing, which is potentially where you start getting to scenarios where you do break the ceiling price, because at that point it's just an extra bedroom, or it doesn't need to be maybe to smash a ceiling price, but potentially there's extra kind of there. So the obvious then next thing after looking at kind of converting a garage is extensions, and there are two different types of main extensions that you commonly see, obviously outwards and upwards. Where would you start as kind of a first base? Where would you start?
So the easy place to start with these extensions is what is permitted development, because you immediately avoid that whole risk of, can we get planning permission?
So what is permitted development? Can you kind of run through that quickly?
So permitted development relating to residential units applies to most residential units, unless you've got a listed building. You may have some restrictions in a conservation area. They're the common things, but typically we can build a side extension 2 stories high, that is no more than half the width of the existing house. Now, if you've got an existing Victorian terrace cottage that's only 3.5, 4 meters wide, an extension that's 2 meters on the half the width of that on the side is not going to be a usable space. So that's not going to work. But if you've got a semi-detached house in a housing estate that's 6-7 meters wide, putting a 3 meter wide extension on the side, that is going to create some usable space. Building extensions on the rear, detached properties, we can build 4 meters on the back under permitted development. Semi-detached and terraced, we can build 3 meters on the back under permitted development. We can double those quantities, those dimensions, with a neighbourhood appraisal process, but that again just gets a little bit more cumbersome. So we can build 3 meters on the back of a semi-detached property. There's a few other things to think about, like drainage and party walls and things, but as a concept, we can build on the back of the property. Bear in mind that some of the properties, that 3 meters might already have been built. Where there's already perhaps a single story extension on the back of the kitchen, you can't build another 3 meters. But those are the things to be looking at, and possibly again in conjunction with some of the other things. Can we bolt these things together? So I would always be looking at what can we do under permitted development. Frequently, 2-story extensions at the back sometimes don't work, because we end up with a building that's too deep and we've got nowhere for windows in the middle. If you have a nice deep kitchen family room, it doesn't matter if the kitchen's a little bit dark. We can put a roof light in there, maybe get some windows in it. We can't have a bedroom with no windows. That's not considered a bedroom. And so Often we don't do 2-story rear extensions, or we might do them not quite as deep as the remainder. But that's where I would be starting from. And as a very rough rule of thumb, a simple extension, you can probably start thinking around about £2,000 per square metre of finished floor. So that's a simple, cheap extension. If you want to put a luxury kitchen in there, then add the cost of the kitchen on top. But otherwise, that will get you what you need. If you're in an expensive part of the town, if you're in a part of the town where there's no access to the rear garden without walking through the building, and things have got to be dug by hand, if there's no parking, then suddenly that 2,000 can go up towards 2,300, 2,500. So you've got to kind of assess what's right. And again, just because you can build 3 meters, if 3 meters doesn't add any more value than 2.5 meters, don't build that extra little bit. I don't think that's the case so much with 3 meters, but maybe 4 meters with a detached house. A 4-meter extension may not add any more value than a 3-meter extension. So don't feel that because you can do it, you should do it. Just understand what adds the true value.
Sure. And the other extension being through the loft, and coming out with a dormer and things like that up there. Can you kind of talk to that? Would that likely be secondary then that you'd look at after your ground floor extensions? Yeah, how would you approach that?
I think you've got to consider what is going to add the value, because if you're building an extension on the ground floor, we're typically talking about adding living space.
Yep.
If we're doing it from an HMO perspective, it would almost certainly be a bedroom or allow us to create an extra bedroom. But if we're flipping a property, we're not very often converting properties to HMOs and then flipping them as an HMO. That's more of a long-term hold. Whereas if we believe that the market needs extra bedrooms, then it's typically more appropriate to convert a loft to create an extra bedroom. So we've got that 3-bedroom family house on the nice estate, and now we can get a master bedroom suite up in the roof, including a nice ensuite, including some nice big picture windows that are up there and out of the way. That is probably going to add more value as a bedroom than, say, an extension on the back that we're saying, well, this could be an extra bedroom overlooking the garden. That doesn't feel like an extra bedroom. That is more of an extra living space. So this comes back to the start of the whole conversation, really. What are we expecting to add value in the area where we're doing it? Who is our market? Who is our demographic? What are they going to want? As I say, we're in this family estate, and of course they're going to want a nice big family master bedroom, a couple's master bedroom at the top, and get the children down on the middle floor. That may well add more value at that area. In that situation. And likewise, we might say, I don't want to build the side extension on this property because I'm now going to lose parking space, and the family want the parking space. So I'm better with a rear extension or a loft conversion than a side extension. So you've got to look at weigh up the whys and wherefores. Loft conversions pretty much start cheaper ones. You might just get them for £35,000. They're definitely a market that's gone up. The building regulations have made them a little bit more expensive to build as far as insulation goes. And in some areas, that could very easily be £50,000, £60,000. So, in some areas, loft conversions are now starting to get to a point where they're not going to add value from an investment perspective. If you're going to flip, will definitely help as part of a long-term hold strategy. Particularly if we're into HMOs and commercial valuations of sui generis HMOs.
Sure. One of the things that we're interested in, we've seen it a couple of times recently, is bungalows and putting on bungalows that often have some form of room up there, and just making that room more of a room. Maybe not even an official bedroom. It may still only have a ladder to get up there, a sturdy ladder, but still a ladder to get up there rather than actually a staircase. And seeing good success from doing that. A few people have mentioned similar things. We had one person mentioned that the filling out a room that was already existing, and I know one other person has gone for the full kind of dormer extension up there. What about we often see especially in London, people talk about basements and making those into livable, livable, not Liverpool, into livable areas. That's like a lot of work. Yeah, can you talk to those?
Yeah, I think my advice with basement conversions is tread with care there. There's a lot more things to consider when we're converting basements. The obvious thing is we are below ground, so we've got to deal with groundwater ingress. And back in the 70s and 80s, we'd just paint tar on the walls and fix plasterboard. We're not allowed to do that now. We have to put a proper tanking system in with membranes. We have to insulate. So we've got to consider that in itself can be quite costly. We've got to consider the floor. How do we stop moisture coming up through the floor? How do we stop the cold coming up through the floor? Well, we need to insulate the floor. Well, now we haven't got the head height, so we've got to dig the floor down. But if we dig the floor down too much, how far can we dig before we get below the foundations? And we now have to underpin our own house because the floor of the basement is below the foundations, and that's suddenly, tens of thousands of pounds. We've got to consider how we get down to the basement. At the moment, because it's a cellar, we can go down quite a steep staircase. But we've now actually, if we're going to make it a habitable room, we've got to put in a staircase at the right angle. And how do we get the head height in? Because now we've got to reconfigure the entrance space, the hallway or the kitchen upstairs to get this staircase in.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to consider here. And now we've created a room that is below, subterranean. It's got a slot of a window on one side where if there is a fire, we've got to get a means of escape. The value of that room is never the value of the nice bedroom we've created up in the loft space. So I think, you said basements in London absolutely will add value because the value of per square foot, per square metre in London is enormous in comparison with suburbia. I think converting basements in most parts of the country is not going to add value. You may be able to improve some existing poor conversions from the past. That probably works. But I think in most parts of the country, converting a basement into just an additional room isn't going to add value. If you can convert the whole basement into a standalone flat, then perhaps it will start to add some value in the right parts. But that's kind of getting on to the next grade. We're now saying, well, we've got this house and we're going to create two dwellings from it and title split, and that's kind of the next level up there again, really. Is adding value, is creating more dwellings from one unit.
For sure, interesting, and of course we've covered a lot of that on the magazine before. It's certainly a very interesting strategy, and a lot of people, especially there. And correct me if I'm wrong. There are some recent kind of permitted development changes coming / have come there with making it easier to convert a house into two flats. I believe it's my understanding, at least.
So I'm not entirely sure the legislation has come in, but it's certainly been talked about, legislation to convert a single house into two flats.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure it's come in, but it has been talked about. And I think that this is the other thing to say, really. The government are attempting, we're going to have a change of government perhaps, but the general consensus is we need to make it smoother for developers to create additional dwellings. And so what we need to be doing as property investors is we need to have our finger on the pulse of what is that legislation that's about to come in or has just come in. Because whilst you're hot off, whilst you're riding that crest of the wave, whilst you've seen the wave building, you want to be jumping on that and be looking for those properties before everyone knows about it.
Sure.
When commercial to residential conversions first came in 2013, there were some cracking deals out there. I got a couple of those deals because no one knew about it.
Sure.
A year later, when your hairdresser and barber and taxi driver are telling you about commercial to residential, you've missed the boat.
Too late.
So you need to be looking at, have your finger on the pulse of legislation, read YPN magazine, about the other articles that other people are posting about changes to planning, and be looking to jump on that wave as it's building, so that you are cleaning up before other people are there. So keep yourself educated. That's really important.
Absolutely. Awesome. Are there any other kind of strategies that you, or areas where you would look at for adding value? I think we've covered most of them, but anything you feel we've missed in terms of the things people should look at?
Well, so I mean, the thing really is, you will add value with all of those. The way to add the most value is by bringing in more of those things, but also be mindful that you're not biting off more than you can chew. If this is your first development, it may be too big for you to do the rear extension, the loft conversion, the basement conversion, convert the garage, full reconfiguration. Bearing in mind that project in itself could take you 10 to 12 months. And over those next 10 to 12 months, you've got to put food on the table somehow. You can't be saying, well, I'm going to make 50 grand out of this next Christmas, because you're going to be skint getting there. So go at sensible steps that you are right for you. Learn on the smaller things, take the risk on the smaller things. If the smaller thing goes wrong, you might be £2,000 out of pocket. That's not going to hurt you. Forego the summer holiday, you're fine. I've got involved with some property investors who are bitten off some big projects, had things go wrong, and they're talking about tens of thousands of pounds, and that hurts, and that'll put you off. So go with small steps, take advice, do sensible things. But I think, going back to where we first started, do your own due diligence, do your own research. Do not believe a thing the estate agent tells you, because their job is to sell you that property. Their job is not to look after your interests. By all means, go and talk to another estate agent about what the value might be finished, but do not believe the estate agent that's selling you the property.
Sure. No, I think that's good advice. And one of the things you mentioned there that we haven't really covered with regards to time is the cost associated with time. Quite often, people doing these developments will be on bridging finance, or they'll be on private lending, which can be very expensive. The idea of doing a loft conversion or doing an extension out the back can be great, and they can add good value. It could work in the area, but if that means that it takes 12 months to do versus getting in, converting a garage, adding an ensuite, and maybe turning that garage into a new bedroom with an ensuite, so you actually add in then 2 ensuites, you put a WC downstairs, and then you do your general other stuff in terms of general redecoration from a kitchen and change bathroom perspective, you could end up making more money. Getting on to the next deal, you spoke about earlier being about recycling your money quickly. You either refinance out of it or you sell at the end of it, whatever your strategy. If you're going in from a bridging perspective, or a private investor money, you're usually looking to recycle quickly, and actually you can end up making more money and having a lot less stress than doing it quicker. There's no need to go super big and do all these crazy stuff. Sometimes it just doesn't add up.
I think unfortunately there's people out there that are saying go big or go home, and that's not right for everyone. And personally, I've got nearly 40 years experience in construction, managing projects. I've managed all sorts of projects of varying sizes, measured in millions. And yet for myself, I will still be quite happy buying a rundown flat where I can move the kitchen, because the risk isn't high. As you say, you can have it done in a few weeks and have tenants in there, or you can get it back on the market. And I mean, I'm getting close to retirement age, so I don't want to be throwing away my retirement getting involved in a massive development. But I think there's gurus out there that are leading people to do the wrong thing. If the right thing for you is a nice bit of steady growth and learn as you go, one project at a time, then just do that. Don't be swept along in the wave of we've got to take this big house and convert it into 3 flats and break the ceiling, when actually, why don't we just refurbish the house nicely and rent it out, or sell it into a slightly different marketplace,
Yeah.
You know, by being smart. Yeah, the reason people aren't buying this house is because they can't park their car anywhere. Well, let's put a driveway in. You know, let's think about those things. And there's definitely clever ways of adding value without going big. You use our head, rather than using our, you know, words that you get excited and trying to
it can sometimes be ego as well. It can sometimes be ego led.
Yeah.
No, I think spot on. Awesome. Well, look, from my perspective, I'm done on questions. I don't know if there's anything you want to finish with, or if you're covered there. If you feel we've covered everything for this topic, yeah, up to you. Kind of finish us off.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on the next bit, which was about creating multiple dwellings, which is kind of that next level. And I think really to say this was really about how this is much more for the newer investors, those getting started. How can we add value to properties? I think the thing to say, two things really. One is you've got to do your own due diligence. The other thing is this will not work to every property in every area. So just because you've seen a rundown property, don't try and pigeonhole something into it if it's not going to work. Move away from it. If you can't see a way of adding value, move away. And I think one final thing is the only way you're going to learn how to add value is by engaging with other people that are doing it. When someone stands up at a networking meeting and says, "Oh, I'm doing an open house at the weekend," go along and see it. See what they've done. See how they've added value. Learn from what they've done. You might see things that you wouldn't do yourself. You'll learn from that. Read YPN magazine. There's articles in there every month. You will not learn this stuff by sitting at home. You want to get out and see it. You want to learn. You want to understand. Talk to other people, and that's where you'll get the ideas and inspiration from. And you'll suddenly bolt together something you saw from one investor with something you saw from someone else, and you will suddenly create that little niche, and you've nailed it. You're there.
Fantastic. No, absolutely. I think that's great. Yeah, great way to finish us off. Thank you very much.
Cool. Good stuff. Thanks very much for speaking to me. It's good to speak to you, Alex.
Fantastic. Thank you.